want to talk a little bit about how businesses, at least in aggregate, there's probably people on the phone who are doing really, really well. There's probably folks on the phone who are doing maybe a little bit worse than what we're about to see. But in aggregate, a lot of us, we're not building things in the right manner. And when I say the right manner, we're not getting the right data to actually understand where value comes from. And to illustrate this, I first want to kind of talk about our obsession with acquisition. So what I mean by that is if we actually look at how much time and how much money you actually spend strictly on acquisition-based growth, as opposed to monetization-based growth or retention-based growth, what we typically find is that it's overwhelming to the point that it's not to say that acquisition is a bad thing, but it is to say that we probably should spend a little bit more time on some of these other growth levers. And so one thing that we did is we actually asked a bunch of founders and executives, if you could focus on one thing in your business when it comes to growth, getting more customers, making more money per customer, or basically retaining those customers longer, which one would you choose? And overwhelmingly, folks basically chose getting more logos. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, but what we're finding is it's part of just this acquisition-based growth culture. And I didn't put this data in here in particular, but one thing that's kind of really interesting is that when we did a study on the actual expenses and the actual costs, operating costs of a particular business over a bunch of different businesses, what we found is that in the median amount of expenses or the median amount of spend that's being put forth on acquisition-based activities is actually about 57%. So the median is basically showing us, and more folks, some of us are doing more than that, some of us are doing less than that, but we're basically obsessed with acquisition. And the problem is that we're not really spending a ton of time when it comes to pricing. Any guesses on how many hours people are spending per year on pricing just inside their business? Michael, what do you think?
Oh, I don't know if that's fair. I have seen the slides.
What did you think before maybe you saw the slides
Before,
there?
yeah, before I would say maybe a week.
A
So
week.
40
Yeah.
hours. Let's give
So
40.
that's pretty generous to kind of keep things moving. It's actually about 15 hours, and it's so little across so many businesses that this is actually in the entire history of their business. So it's kind of shocking and it's kind of almost unbelievable. But what we found is that a lot of folks, they set up their pricing, when they need a pricing, page basically, and then they don't really revisit it. They just kind of keep going with acquisition. They just kind of keep going with retention. And, there's plenty of people who do tweak pricing, on a consistent basis. But if you really audit how much time that you're actually spending, it's probably very, very low relative to, the time you're spending on acquisition. And the issue to kind of bring this home a little bit is that acquisition is now table stakes. So we took, I believe it's about 700 companies, and we basically isolated all of their growth numbers. So their acquisition numbers, their monetization numbers, and their retention numbers. And we basically wanted to figure out if we improved each of those levers by the same relative amount. So if we improved acquisition by 1%, monetization by 1%, retention by 1%, what would be the relative impact on revenue? And what we found is that if you improve your conversion volume or your net new leads by about 1%, you're actually going to see, or you used to see, about a 3% boost in your bottom line. And that's actually gone down over the past number of years to about 2%. And it's probably never going to get to zero, but it is an indication that, again, you need to be good at acquisition just to survive. You probably do need to spend the most money on acquisition, mainly because you do need to acquire customers. But when we look at improving your retention by about 1% or your pricing by about 1%, meaning improving your churn rate or improving your ARPU, this is the effect that we actually see. And that effect is actually getting more dramatic over time. And this should feel pretty intuitive, right? Because all of that density that's happening in the market, what's essentially happening is we're living in a world where that growth or that ability to get growth is basically shifting to different parts of your business. And to make matters a little bit worse is that this monetization and retention is not something that we normally focus on. A lot of us, we kind of tense up when we need to focus on it. And it's not something that's necessarily extremely difficult. It's something that just takes a little bit more attention and takes a little bit more, focusing on a framework and focusing on a little bit of a process for it. Now, what's kind of interesting as well is that when we kind of move on from this, what we find is that it was okay to also be pretty lazy when it came to things like customer development or customer research. And what I mean by that is a lot of us, when we were building our businesses, essentially we were kind of shooting from the hip in the sense of basically when we were building product or we were building new features, we were like, all right, these are just the natural features that we need to build. The issue is that a lot of us ended up building kind of the wrong things, particularly in this dense market. And to introduce this concept, I have to introduce a model that you may not have seen before. But for any MBAs in the room, it's a nice 2x2. So I know that's kind of your favorite thing in the world. So should make you happy here. But what I mean by that, just to kind of skip ahead, or actually, I'm going to skip ahead just for a second here, Michael, is that a lot of us ended up basically building, the wrong aspects of a product. And when you think about value in particular, for any particular type of product, you have two axes of value. You have one axis, which is basically the actual features for that particular product. So for a cup of coffee, you have things like the taste, the temperature, the country of origin. And then the other axis is actually your willingness to pay. So that's actually the price elasticity for a cup of coffee. And I'll pause here and I just want to make sure I give Michael a chance to comment because he's seen tons of people collect tons of data. And what have you seen just in terms of like customer research and things like that?
Well, it fits really well in our space and resonates with us. Without having that research taken care of, it's very difficult to validate your decisions. With Qualaroo, our playbook is validate, validate, validate. Progressing with a foundation of simple intuition is pretty risky without having that data to back up any decisions that you do make as a company, whatever those decisions may be, whether it's product, feature, or pricing. And so when you do have that feedback from your users, you're able to have a foundation of facts and say, based on this information, we're going to go and move in this direction. It's less risky. It involves more forethought and is therefore ultimately more successful.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. And I think that to kind of illustrate this and to kind of show you just how far apart we are from validating those ideas, when we look at this model or we look at any particular product, again, you have these two axes of value. We can actually, map by collecting data and find out that if we surveyed this entire group of people on the call today, we might find out for a cup of coffee that the most important thing to you are things like taste. We might also find out that you're pretty indifferent about temperature. And when push comes to shove, the thing that you care the least about is actually the country of origin. Now, this isn't to say that people don't care about country of origin. It's just there's very, very few of us who do care about it. Now, when we cross-reference this type of data with willingness to pay, we might be able to find out that those of you who care about taste, they're actually willing to pay more. And those of you who care about the country of origin, there's very, very few of you, but you're also willing to pay more. And when we use some of the kind of cousins of the methodology that we're going to teach you later today, basically we can actually get this data for your business. But what we ended up doing is we actually went out and we asked a bunch of product folks, and I think it was about 1,300 product folks for their last, N features, and they did just under 5,000 features. We asked them to basically place them on this quadrant. And what we told them is that if you have a feature that is high value and also high willingness to pay, you have a differentiable feature. If you have a feature that is low value from kind of an attribute perspective, but high willingness to pay, that's an add-on. If you have a feature that's high value but low willingness to pay, that's a core feature. And if you have something that's low and low, then you have kind of like a trash feature, which I know is a little bit aggressive. But we presented them this model and we asked them to place their last, N features, this 5,000 features on this particular quadrant. And this is what the product folks ended up saying. So they think they're building a lot of value. They think they're building a lot of things that can be monetized in some way, or at least are defending the base. There's a good number of us who are a little bit insecure in this lower left-hand quadrant, someone who's really insecure on that really, really low dot there. But what was interesting is that we then went out to talk to about 1.5 million different customers using the methodologies that we're going to talk about in a bit. And we actually measured where the value actually was. And when we talked to those folks of these products, here's what we found. And so just to kind of do this for dramatic effect, this is what we think we're building, and this is what we're actually ending up building. And a lot of this comes down to that we're not really doing our own customer research. We're not really doing our own customer development. We're kind of winging it when it comes to product, and we're kind of winging it when it comes to understanding value because we're not talking to those customers. And unfortunately, the reason that this should be so scary, and probably the scariest thing on Halloween that you're going to hear, is basically when you think about your business, and it doesn't really matter what you're selling. It could be, a nonprofit, it could be a subscription piece of software, it could be a subscription e-commerce, it could just be a retail product. Everything in your business, from your sales team, your marketing team, all the way down to your product team and your finance team, is used to either drive someone to a point of conversion or to justify the product or the price that you're offering them. So if you don't know who these people are, if you don't know what they care about, what they don't care about, if you don't know, what their unit economics look like, those types of things, there's no way that you're going to be able to honestly put forth the best price, let alone put forth the best product and put forth the best company. And too many of us, unfortunately, we just focus on acquisition, throwing a bunch of stuff up against the wall and hoping all of it sticks without really thinking about that customer, without getting into the mind of that particular customer. And unfortunately, this just doesn't work anymore in the market that we're in. And so I've made everyone feel bad, which was not my intention, I promise. I want to make a Halloween joke, but I can't think of a good one. I'm sure there's a good one out there about scaring people. But I think that the big thing is, like, how do we fix this? And what it really comes down to is making sure that you understand your customer. And this isn't to say that you're always going to agree with your customer or you're going to ask your customer exactly what they want and that's what you're going to build. But it does come down to understanding where they see value, where they're confused, all of these types of things. And what we're going to do is we're going to basically walk through a way that we can actually fix this. But I think you have to keep in mind is that the biggest barrier is you wanting to fix this. And I know that sounds cliche and sounds super motivational speakery, but the thing is, and the thing that I've learned in, working with tons of companies over the years, is that a lot of companies, it's like we read blog posts, we go to webinars and things like that. And then, we think about it and maybe we occasionally do things, but a lot of us kind of like don't jump in. And I think this is something that, yes, you need to start small, but you got to get your mindset around really wanting to fix this and really wanting to understand your customer. And so I promise everything's going to be okay. We're going to walk through some good tactics. We're going to walk through how you can start this. Michael's going to give some really, really good context on, how you can, get up and running literally today. But it's something where I promise it's not something that's super difficult. You don't have to completely change what you're doing. You just have to start taking some action.